It's now a month ago that Trayvon Martin was killed, and tonight an enraged nation insists that this death was racially motivated and that the gunman, Neighborhood Watch volunteer George Zimmerman, should be arrested and charged with murder. Today, Trayvon Martin's father spoke emotionally at a town hall meeting in Sanford, Florida. Take a look at this.
Zimmerman took my son away from me. Not only was he my son, he was my best friend. He meant something to me. He meant something to all of these people out here. He meant something to these 2 million ballots. For the Sanford Police Department to feel as though they were going to sweep another young black minority death under the rug, it's an atrocity. This family is hurt. This family is torn, and the Sanford Police Department needs to be held accountable. George Michael Zimmerman needs to be arrested. He needs to be put on trial. He needs to be given a sentence by a jury of his peers. We're not asking for an eye, we're asking for justice, justice, justice.
As the Martin family and the nation continued to demand justice, we're hearing and learning more about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman and asking how and why did this tragedy happen. Joining me to discuss this, George Karen Mills Francis, host of Judge Karen's Court, Mark Eiglarsh, a criminal defense attorney, and Roland Martin, a CNN analyst. Roland, you're in Sanford tonight. Can you give us the atmosphere down there?
First of all, it is a tremendous number of people who are out here. There were folks obviously marching earlier. I actually moderated a community forum with the lawyers as well as other folks as well, talking about all the facts of this case. Extremely emotional. Lots of folks clearly demanding justice. African Americans, but also whites out here as well. And so certainly a racially mixed crowd, again, trying to get answers, but also asking how can someone gun down a child who wasn't armed and that person still walk free? That's the question folks still want answered, and that's what they're demanding to their Sanford City Council inside.
And Roland, that wouldn't happen in another state, would it? I mean, that stand your ground law, that one of the travesties that caused this tragedy is that law. Is that accurate to say? I mean, that second issue, yeah, I think, is this subtle form of racism that a lot of people were not aware of. But I think the stand your ground law really, let's say, caused this thing.
Actually, I think what you have several layers here. First and foremost, why did George Zimmerman make a decision to call Trayvon Martin suspicious? That's first. The second thing, he's driving along. 911 says, "Are you following him?" He says, "Yes, sir, we don't need you to do that." If he had stopped doing that, then there's no issue. Why did he get out of his SUV? If he stays in his car, we don't have this problem here. Then you get to the actual confrontation that took place. And the problem is, according to the statute, the State Your Ground statute, you are granted immunity from criminal prosecution or civil prosecution if you say that you did this utilizing stand your ground. But here's the problem, Dr. Drew. George Zimmerman's attorney has said we're not using that reference. We're using the self-defense. And so the law is all over the place, and it's a problem. Even prosecutors are saying here in Florida that we don't know what's going on, and the number of justifiable homicides has dramatically increased since 2005 when this law was passed. And the problem, Dr. Drew, some 23 other states now have stand your ground laws. So the question is, what do those laws look like in those states?
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. Judge Karen, I want to go down to you. You're in Miami. The rest of the nation kind of shaking its head. Is this just another, is this Florida again? Do we have to have all this stuff go on in Florida? I mean, there's just, I almost, all right, you answer that question first, because to me, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there really is a racial issue here at its core, but ultimately we're looking and shaking our head at Florida.
Well, I think that too much has centered on the racial part of it. I think what maybe a lot of black people are feeling is that the way the police handled this has some sort of vestiges of the past and the way race relations were in the past. Because if Mr. Zimmerman had been arrested and charged that night, none of us today, most of us today, would not know who Trayvon Martin is. What is also upsetting to people is I have 2 nephews and a niece who attend the same high school in Miami that Trayvon Martin attended. As a matter of fact, one of my nephews knew Trayvon Martin. And my nieces and nephews are honor students. And guess what? They are always wearing those hoodies. It's almost like a uniform. And they were over to my house this weekend, and they want to go up to 7-Eleven. And all I'm thinking of is anything can happen to you now. You don't have to be getting into any trouble. You could be a straight A student. You could not be armed. But another point I'd like to make, Dr. Drew, is that everybody is looking at this stand your ground law from the perspective of Mrs. Zimmerman. Why not look at it from the perspective of the victim? Because guess what? Trayvon Martin was exercising his right to stand his ground. It's a dark, rainy night. You're walking down the street. An unknown assailant is following you in an SUV. You think you've lost him. Now he's gotten out of his car. He's following you. He has a gun. So the question should become, was Trayvon Martin exercising his stand your ground rights? Precisely. Why this is important is because there's a Florida statute, and then there is the standard jury instructions. And the standard jury instruction in a self-defense case says that if you provoke the attack against yourself, you can't argue self-defense.
All right,
So,
I understand that. I've heard that argument, and we've got a defense attorney here. Mark, what are you going to do with that if you're trying to defend these? Is everyone making an appropriate point here?
Yeah, no, personally, I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I think he should be charged. What the defense lawyer is going to argue are these new facts that came out, released by the Orlando Sentinel via law enforcement, apparently corroborated by witnesses, that Trayvon Martin allegedly punched the Zimmerman in the mouth. Apparently, he had blood to show the cops. He also then allegedly got on top of him.
What if that was him standing his ground?
Hold on. Listen to me. I'm not saying that I agree with it. I'm saying that those facts are coming out. Now, what would preclude Zimmerman from prevailing, I believe, is a statute known as 776.041. Karen Mills referred to it. If he was the initial aggressor, it wouldn't apply. And number 2, if he was committing a forcible felony. If he came out with his gun and assaulted Martin as he's simply walking down the street, then that would take him out of the protection of stand your ground. So I don't think it applies. I don't think the problem is the stand the ground law. I think it's how it's being applied. It's being misapplied, and hopefully this new prosecutor will apply it properly.
Thank goodness you brought up 776.041. Thank goodness.
Yeah, I had to pull that out sometime.
I want to bring something else up. Tonight, CNN confirms that Trayvon was apparently suspended from school for the 10 days in the weeks preceding this horrible incident. An empty plastic bag found in Martin's book bag tested positive for pot, for marijuana, apparently. Roland, is any of this relevant?
What?
I know it's creating a lot of news. Is that relevant at all? So what's what I say?
Actually,
I'm asking Roland, though.
Here's what I'm trying to figure out, because previously I read a report through the Miami Herald and the Kansas City newspaper where the principal there said Trayvon Martin was suspended not for doing anything illegal, but for being found in a part of the school building that was unauthorized. And so this whole idea of this bag or whatever, the question is, where is it actually coming from? And so that's simply, I want to know. But here's the deal. It doesn't matter. The reason, now, I'm not excusing anything. The reason it doesn't matter is because that has nothing to do with the shooting on that particular night. The question that any prosecutor, any special prosecutor, any grand jury, any jury has to say is, wait a minute, what took place on the night of February 26th? Not what happened when he was suspended at school. Was he doing anything illegal? That's the question. Was he trespassing? Was he?
Not only that,
so that's the real issue.
You guys, I have to go to break. But you realize how silly the implication is here. Oh, if he's smoking pot, he's a bad kid, and he's going to do bad things. Reefer madness, guys. It was reefer madness, I'm telling you. It's so ridiculous. Blaming the victim is the part of the problem I'm really concerned with above all else, and we're going to continue this conversation after the break. So